Dear viewers, thank you for joining us. You're watching Obi and Horn of Africa. This is Future Africa Spotlight. Today we're going to talk about the Ethiopian national dialogue in the making. And here I joined by Garrison, an independent journalist live from California. Garrison, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right. Ethiopia is going to hold a national dialogue in the near future. What is your take up upon this?
Well, it seems like something you very well need to have. I think it's something that you very much need to have. Since I started talking to a lot of Ethiopians, and that happened after the war began, because I started trying to understand the war and particularly my own country's involvement in it. Since I started talking to Ethiopians, I've constantly heard about ethnicity. And I've heard a lot about genocide. And this caused me to today be thinking a lot about the role that genocide and the idea of genocide, legalities around genocide play in the world, in international law and in the policies of various countries, particularly Western countries, where there are many parties and organizations who are organized to stop genocide in the developing world. That's their reason for existence. Organizations like the Aegis Trust, like Genocide Watch, which comically said in an email to an organization I know, I think it's called Amhara Genocide Watch. Anyway, the founder and president of Genocide Watch tried to tell this other organization that he had a trademark on the word genocide. There's something that happens when you're always talking about genocide. It's like you're always inviting all of these Western organizations that are organized around the idea that they need to stop genocide in the developing world. You're inviting them into your life in a way. So the word genocide is very, very highly politicized. And it also brings with it the idea of privilege. People have been the victim of genocide, are due various kinds of restitution or a special victim status. And you know, the United Nations is not obliged to intervene if it determines that there is a genocide taking place, but it can, according to international law, it can do that without violating international law, as any country that chose to try to do that or claim to be doing that unilaterally would be. They would be. And any country that unilaterally intervened to quote unquote stop genocide, as the US did in Libya and Syria, would be in violation of international law. I heard recently, I think it was, how do you pronounce his name? Getachew Reda, the head of the TPLF spokesperson, calling for an intervention to stop Tigray genocide and a no-fly zone over Tigray. And like, you know what happened with the no-fly zone in Iraq and Libya, or maybe you don't, but a no-fly zone doesn't mean nobody gets to fly there. It means the people who declare it's a no-fly zone do. But he was calling, as he has been all along, and other members of the Stopping Genocide community, the Western community that identifies and bases its existence on stopping genocide in the developing world, has been calling for some sort of intervention. Now it started with sanctions on Ethiopia and Eritrea to stop genocide in Tigray. And they will talk about injuries and other, and crimes committed by all sides, but the word genocide has been reserved for what's happening in Tigray. So as part of the national, boy, this is really nervy of me to suggest something like this from the outside. But the reason I'm suggesting is it is because I'm looking at what happens in my country, what happens in Europe, what happens as part of the neocolonial project. One thing you said was one of Abiy's goals was to stop neocolonialism. Great goal. And one of the tropes and institutions in the Western world that is paired as part of neocolonialism is this idea and this constant institutional push to stop genocide. And so if you were to decide amongst yourselves that you're going to talk about something in a different way, you're going to talk about this in a different way, whatever the arguments that you've had with one another and whatever their consequences have been, however horrific, then you're not inviting all these crusading white saviors into your lives.
What is expected from stakeholders to have a very genuine national dialogue?
I think putting emphasis into these unifying projects that would make everyone's lives better, like the GERD, like delivering electricity to everyone in the country, like food security, universal education, universal health care. Goals like that are goals that everyone should be able to share.
I meant by on what area should the government and those displeased political parties should focus by giving emphasis to bring a common and mutual consensus, to reach on mutual consensus?
Again, this may not be for me to say, but I think those who started the war should be prosecuted. Others, the idea of a wide amnesty, that seems like a good idea to me. In the long run, I think you have to settle some issues around, for one, language, and you have to settle issues around tribal identity, if I don't know if that's the appropriate word, but ethnic identity and national identity. And people need to somehow make a commitment to national identity as well as ethnic identity, or to whatever extent they want to sustain a commitment to ethnic identity. If you don't have a sense of national identity and national goals, it's going to fall apart. Language seems to me like one of the most significant issues that you have to resolve. As I understand it, there are 80 languages. And the primary languages are Amharic, Tigrinya, and Oromo. And Amharic for a long time has been the national language and the language of business. Now, I don't know what you should do about this. I just know that it's a problem that I would think you have to work out between yourselves one way or another. Congo has a similar problem. The Democratic Republic of Congo has 80 languages. And I imagine there are other African countries in similar situations. A number of nations have several official languages. I believe that Somalia's official languages are Somali and Arabic. Whenever I look up the information about a nation, one of the first things I look to see is what languages they speak and what languages are official. Rwanda went through something like this when in 1994, the invading Tutsi who invaded from Uganda, they were English speakers by that time. They had grown up in Uganda, which is an English-speaking country. They invaded and the Rwandans who had not left Rwanda were French speakers. Now, of course, they shared the language Kinyarwanda, but what was going to be the language of business and education and relations with the outside world. And so they had this problem between French and English, and ultimately they made both official languages.
Yeah.
I can't really say how to solve this problem, except I think you might have two, maybe three languages. I'm not a linguist, so it's a little hard for me to say how to handle this, but certainly the people who speak these 80 languages, they need to be able to speak one or two that enable them to act as Ethiopian citizens, not just members of their ethnic group, and to relate to the world outside Ethiopia. How you would settle, whether those would be Oromo and Amharic, or Amharic, Oromo, or Tigrinya, I don't know how you would settle that. That's like I said, one thing you would have to settle for yourself.
Let me proceed to another question.
Okay.
Your insight about the recent telephone conversation between Biden and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. Do you think the US government is surrender to Abiy Ahmed and Ethiopia after the no more and this neocolonialism resistance?
I think Biden is going to look and see what the writing on the wall is. If the writing on the wall is that the National Army, which certainly outnumbers the Tigrayan army, has military superiority, and that the TPLF is not going to be able to match that military superiority or gain enough support among the rest of the population to become militarily superior, then short of an intervention, short of a military action on behalf of the TPLF, the government forces are going to win. And it's possible that Biden sees that. And so he's trying to negotiate what he can. But we don't know. And also, I would warn people to keep in mind that Obama was shaking hands with Muammar al-Gaddafi several years before destroying the Libyan state. And so was Nicolas Sarkozy. I don't think it's a moral conversion on President Biden's part. I think it's practical politics. And frankly, although political figures are always playing like a chessboard, they're always like players on a chessboard. My impression of Prime Minister Abiy is that he has real values and goals for the Ethiopian people, which include all those unifying goals I talked about: the GERD, electrification, food security, and a sense of Ethiopian citizenship. I know that the Constitution is a really sensitive issue, so I'm going to stay out of that.
What do you expect from the upcoming national dialogue? Would it bring a long-lasting peace for Ethiopia, do you think?
Oh, I would certainly hope so. I mean, Ethiopia has such enormous potential. Like I said, arable land, hydropower potential, human resources, great human resources, history, culture. So I would hope so. But as I've said before, I'm not one of these Westerners who can sit here telling Ethiopians or anyone else in Africa what they should do. I would like to see my own country step aside. I'd like to see my own government and all of these neocolonialists, including the genocide professionals I was talking about earlier. I'd like them to step aside and let Ethiopians see what they can work out together. But, that's not realistic. We're not at a point in history where the great powers are going to step aside. So that's one of the reasons I talked about the genocide professionals and the way that they impose their way of thinking on Africa. I think it's important to be constantly aware of the way that that's happening. And for example, If you're always talking about genocide, then you're giving that, assuming, I mean, I kind of prefer the term ethnically motivated massacres. I think that's more descriptive and it doesn't carry all this weight. I mean, it's tragic. It doesn't carry all this weight that the word genocide does. If you emphasize that, then you don't talk about killing people to steal their resources, which is what I believe happened in Gambela. I don't know a lot about this yet. Someone sent me a film to watch. I'm going to watch it. Obag Metho is one of the most wonderful Ethiopians I've met, and I know those are his people there. As I understand that, they were massacred and driven off their lands because some big multinational agricultural corporations wanted that land. And when I had a conversation with Belen Seyoum, she said that this government was going to try to do something about the way the TPLF had given that land to these big multinational corporations and let that happen to the Anuak. So if you're constantly using the word genocide, then you're inviting that whole Western construct into your life, and it comes to seem like it has more importance than when somebody comes, when Western economic interests come to steal everything you have.
Ethiopians are fighting neocolonialism. We can mention this no more hashtag and no more movement. Do you think those rallies, campaigns, demonstrations made all over the world to resist the US intervention in Ethiopia work out properly?
Americans and other Westerners starting to attend. I have done some work to talk about the sanctions. I helped organize a webinar about how the sanctions are going to affect Ethiopia. And on January 23rd, we're having a webinar about how people around the world are standing up to sanctions and how countries who've been sanctioned are helping one another. One of the speakers there will be Elias Amari, who is an Eritrean American, who has spent much of his life in Eritrea. And he's going to talk about how Eritrea stood up to sanctions. These are people that I have met at these rallies, and these people are people I met at these rallies. And the first few times I attended, I was the only white person there. But last time there were more, and now there are more as there were in these webinars about sanctions and sanctions being imposed on Ethiopia. Because of that, more and more people are becoming aware of what's being done to Ethiopia and why these demonstrations are being held. There are, communities here who understand what the US and NATO have done to so many other countries in the world. I think they've also been a success in that I could see all the people who came to the rallies coming together to reinforce one another. And there were substantial numbers. It's not easy to get the kinds of numbers of people into the streets that the Eritrean and Ethiopian communities have in these demonstrations.
This week, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed held a candid phone conversation with President Joe Biden. And let me read what Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has tweeted. I held a candid phone conversation with President Joseph R. Biden, Jr., on current issues in Ethiopia, bilateral relations, as well as regional matters. We both agree there is great value in strengthening our cooperation through constructive engagement founded on mutual respect. What do you comprehend from this tweet?
As I said, President Obama was shaking hands and sitting down at, I think it was a G7 meeting next to Muammar al-Gaddafi 2 years before the the US destroyed the Libyan state. So talking is good. And we can't know what it means because, as I've said before, and I'm sure you know, nobody really knows what they said. That's the kind of polite diplomatic statement that is made. We talked about having a more respectful relationship. But what else did they talk about? Did they talk about the dam? Did they talk about Western Tigray, otherwise known as Northern Amhara? That's another situation where words like ethnic cleansing and genocide seem to be overwhelming any discussion of the actual land dispute there. Every once in a while in the Western press, you hear that there's a land dispute in what is called Western Tigray and what the Amhara call Northern Amhara, and that's the reason for a lot of the fighting there, but it's very, very occasional. Instead, you hear all the time about ethnic cleansing. And again, this invites all these self-righteous, obnoxious white people into your lives.
As I have said, Ethiopia is going to usher a national dialogue in the near future. Who ought to be the moderator and the facilitator of this ambitious national dialogue?
I mean, I don't think it should be any third party. I don't think it should be anybody from the outside. I mean, the US keeps talking like, okay, they want to come in and mediate. Like they want both parties, as if there were only two parties. They want Tigrayans and the TPLF and the Ethiopian government to sit down as though they were equals. When Abiy Ahmed's government is elected, it's a national government, and the TPLF represents 6.1% of the population. How can they sit down as equals with no conditions? The US has said over and over, we want you all to sit down with no conditions and mediate, as though these were marital partners in need of competent marriage counseling, and the US would be the counselor. I can't tell you who would best lead a national dialogue there, and I would think it would be people from the many nationalities and regions somehow agreeing to talk together. I don't know of one master mediator that I can think of. I mean, as far as voices go, I have admired the voice of Bülent Seyum, your foreign secretary. I think she's very rational and well-spoken, and she seems to me to have like Ethiopian values. But I really don't know. I really don't know beyond that. I don't know about religious leaders. I mean, I think probably religion leaders of Ethiopia's various religions should probably be involved. I mean, a lot of people should be involved. I mean, that's why you would call it national reconciliation, because lots of people and their leaders would be involved. As an outsider, the main thing I have to say is that an outsider like the US has no business claiming that they're going to come in and create some kind of resolution.
What has to be the role of media in promoting this national dialogue independently?
Well, that's very interesting. As I understand it, radio is still the most important medium in Ethiopia as it is in most of Africa. Isn't that true?
Sure.
Yeah. So, well, you have to use the radio. I'm asking myself, you're asking me questions that I haven't thought of, but of course it's media. That's why it's called media, is because it's a connection. It's a mediation between people. It's how they understand each other. In many ways, media and politics are the same thing.
I mean, what is expected from those media personalities in avoiding partiality or in avoiding favoring only one party. You understand? In promoting their ethical values and professionalism.
I love, let's go back to radio. I love radio. I'm a radio producer myself, and I love grassroots community radio. And radio is in many ways a community medium. And so it seems to me that it would be good to set up radio broadcasts where people from within the community can get up and speak to their truth rather than having a broadcaster speak to them. Some of the best radio I've ever heard was when a radio producer went into some communities, and there were communities that were struggling. And he just set up a microphone and said, okay, everybody who wants to speak, come up and speak. And I know several other people who went to help with radio in other countries and just said, here, we have a microphone.
I'm Garrison, an independent journalist from US, California. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. I'll talk to you later, Adis.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. This brings to the end of our edition for today. Bye-bye. See you next time with another edition.